Well, good morning and welcome to SouthPoint Church. Didn't our worship team do a good job leading us this morning? Why don't we give them a round of applause? Hey, I just want to say thank you. It's daylight savings times, and you made it to the early service, so I just want to say great job. Thanks for coming out and joining us. My name is Matt. I'm part of the team here at SouthPoint Church, where we're one church in two locations. So I want to say hi to our Leonardtown campus, and I also want to say hi, Lusby. We love you and appreciate you. Excited that you're a part of who we are. Hey, we're in week 2 of a series called 4 Questions Every Kid Needs Answered. And I need to be honest, I'm pretty pumped about this series because I think this series has so much potential. And here are the 4 questions that every kid needs answered. And every kid means every kid all the time on every continent in every language, regardless of culture, age, or gender. We all have these same 4 questions. And they start off with question number 1 is, what are the boundaries? Do you love me? Will you be there for me? And how can I win the big battles? Now, if you didn't make it last week or this is your first Sunday, I can understand you might be disappointed and you may be thinking, man, I came to church on daylight savings time and they're talking about something that doesn't even apply to me. You may be here going, I'm not a parent yet. Or maybe I never want to be a parent. Or maybe you've already been a parent and are thanking God that it's over, right? You never get to be over being a parent. Can we just all the parents, we can just laugh and nod our heads, right? We know what we're talking about, right? And so you may be thinking, listen, this message might not have anything for me. And before you check out, I want to recap from last week 3 reasons why no one should check out and why this series is for each and every one of us. So I want to start off with the 3 reasons why you shouldn't check out, why I shouldn't check out, why anyone shouldn't check out from the series. And here's reason number 1 why we shouldn't check out is because we were all kids once. Come on, we were all kids once. Listen, we all understand the truth that age doesn't make you an adult. Yeah, age doesn't make you an adult. Maturity makes you an adult. And we talked about this last week. We said, listen, if any of those 4 questions go unanswered or answered incorrectly, our stories can get stuck as an adult. And so this series isn't just for little kids. This series is for big kids because we've all been a kid. Reason number 2, we all know a kid, right? We all know a kid. We all have a niece, a nephew. We may have grandchildren. We may have a neighbor. We may be a teacher. We may be coaching. We all know a kid. And multiple studies outside of the church and in society have told us that kids that are successful usually have adults in their life outside their parents because parents say something and the kids go, well, you have to say that because you're my parent and you love me. But when an adult who's their friend says it, they're like, oh, that was the smartest thing ever, even though it's the exact same thing the parent said. And so, listen, we all know a kid and have an opportunity to be in a kid's life and have a positive impact. And the last reason you should check out is because we can all agree that kids matter. And kids matter because they turn into adults who matter. And we all know this truth. Kids can't become the adults they're meant to be without adults in their life. So reason number 1 you shouldn't check out. We've all been a kid. And maybe that question didn't get answered for us. Maybe we're stuck in our story. We all know a kid that we can befriend or help with, or maybe someday we'll be parents, or maybe we're parents now. And we can all agree that kids matter, that they can never become what they're meant to be unless someone helps them along in their journey. So this week, we're going to answer the first question, what are my boundaries? What are my boundaries? And before we're going to answer that question, I want to have a little bit of, can we have some honest time in church? We're going to have a little bit of honest time. And this may shock you. It may surprise you a little bit that you're going to hear this in church, but I just think we need to be honest about this. Boundaries in the moment, they feel yucky. Boundaries in the moment, they feel restrictive. Boundaries in the moment often feel like a pain, right? I mean, if we're really honest, like boundaries, they're not fun and they're not easy. Matter of fact, we're going to put this up on the screen, and as I wrote this, I was kind of freaked out. Boundaries feel bad because they're draining. Okay, come on. All the parents should know that this is true. Trying to set and keep boundaries, it is draining. And trying to keep them, it is draining. Listen, boundaries require effort. They require discipline. They require no's in the moment for a better yes later. So boundaries aren't fun or easy. And you're like, oh, I thought at church you were supposed to tell me something that they're good. But can we just all be honest? Boundaries in the moment don't feel really good, right? Can we just, are we allowed to be honest? I know it's early, but let's just all shake our heads. Act like you're awake with me. Everyone shake. Boundaries in the moment don't feel good. And so you know what? When boundaries in the moment don't feel good, we go, listen, I want to feel good. And so you know what? Not having boundaries in the moment feels so good, doesn't it? It feels good to just avoid them. Like, hey, you know, it would just be easier, right? Come on, listen, it feels better. It feels so good. It can't be wrong. All bad stories start with that, right? Right? It feels so good, it can't be wrong, and so it feels good. And not only because boundaries don't feel good, we go, listen, I don't have to follow boundaries. I can resist them, I can cross them, right? I can avoid them because they don't feel good. And the second thing is, it's really freeing, right? It feels freeing, right? So free to not have boundaries. And if we're really honest, we also feel like, listen, we're here in America. In America, we have the right to feel good in freedom, right? And so I just shouldn't have any boundaries. Sounds good. Freeing and feels good. However, if you're here and you're over 5 years old, there's a small but powerful problem with that, isn't it? I mean, can we be honest this morning? Feelings aren't always fact. Feelings aren't the whole story. And if we're really honest, most of the decisions we made based on impulse and emotion alone turned out to be decisions that we regret. So decisions that we made based just on feelings and emotion alone often decisions that we regret. And then yes, here in America, and yes, everywhere, you are free to make choices. But when we are free to make choices, that doesn't necessarily mean that we are free from the consequences of choice. Here's the reality. The old saying is so true. The old saying is so true, isn't it? We are free to choose, but we're not free from the consequences of our choices. A matter of fact, if you're here and you're a grown-up, you didn't just get older, you actually grew up, you know that there's a giant difference between something that feels good and is good for you. Everyone smile, come on, is that true? We all know that there's a difference between something that feels good but is good for you. And this leads us kind of to our opening truth. You've experienced it, I've experienced it. It's gonna be up on the screen this morning. A lack of boundary feels freeing. A lack of boundaries feels so free, feels good and free. But in reality, it chains us to consequences that are beyond our control. A lack of boundaries feels freeing, but in reality, it actually chains or ties us to consequences beyond our control. People might be going, hey, Matt, what's an example of where I felt free, but it chained me to a consequence, right, that was beyond my control? Okay, now I know this hasn't happened to anyone in this room. How many of you have ever been out and about and you saw something you couldn't afford? You don't have to raise your hand, but I know I've done it. I've been out and about and saw something I couldn't afford. And if you can have a credit card, you know what you've done or thought? You said, you know how freeing and how good it would feel. I have this magic card that allows me to get what I want now and I can pay later. That is feeling good and some freedom. And so you swipe. And the next time you're out, you can't afford it. You didn't save for it, right? But you want it because it feels good and you want the freedom. And so you swipe that card again and you live like that and you feel free and you feel good. But then when your friends ask you, maybe a year or so later, hey, why don't you come and hang out? You go, I can't. Why? Well, I can't afford to. Well, what do you mean? Well, all that feeling good and all that freedom that I swiped the card, the bills came due, and now I am chained to all those payments that I owe the credit card and the credit companies, and I am not free, and it doesn't feel good to not be able to go to do anything. See, sometimes what feels good in the moment changes to consequences. Okay, so some of you got that point. How about this one? And I know in church, like some of you, this is not a guilt thing. This is just a true thing. Hey, I'm free. I'm an adult. I'm 21. I can drink as much as I want. I'm an adult. I'm going to go out and I'm going to just drink. I'm going to party. And so you have a couple and then you start feeling good and you go, well, I'm going to have a couple more, right? And so you're like, it's free and it feels good. I'm an adult. I'm allowed to do what I want to do. Right until you're chained to the consequence of hugging the porcelain bowl. And I know that's not happened to anybody here in this room. Like, before I was a follower of Jesus, it happened to me. Like, I get it. Like I'm not saying, I'm not trying to, be mean or throw guilt on anybody, but like, you're free to do something, but you're not free of the consequences. And sometimes it feels free, but in reality, it changes us to consequences. Sexual activity. And I don't mean this in a mean way. I mean this is true. I can't tell you the number of people that come up to me and they go, Pastor Matt, I can't believe God let me get pregnant. What? It's not the Immaculate Conception. God asked you not to do something, and you know what? You were free to choose what you wanted to do, but you were not free. Now you're chained to that consequence, and that consequence could be a pregnancy, it could be a STD. I mean, it could be a bunch of other things. You're free to procrastinate. Got any students? Man, I got a test coming up. Maybe you're at high school. Maybe you're in middle school. Maybe you're here and you're an adult and you're in a master's class and you're just tired and you go, I don't want to study right now. And it feels so good and freeing not to study right until you have to take the test. And then you say this prayer, God, help me. And God's go, okay, I will help you remember everything that you studied. Right? Come on, give me this smile. Can we just be honest? Like, I'm going to help you remember everything you studied. And you go, well, I'm going to be in trouble then. And see, what felt good in the moment changes to consequences we may not want. It may feel good in the moment to break a work rule or to avoid our taxes or to break a law. But when you see those little lights behind you and the officer tells me, hey, it's I-95, not 95-mile-an-hour speed limit. I am now chained to the consequences of that. And see, here's the truth. Boundaries don't feel good. And when you and I choose to avoid boundaries, when you and I choose to resist boundaries, when you and I choose to cross boundaries, eventually we will be tied to consequences that are destructive and painful. And so we're left asking, well, if boundaries don't feel good in the moment, why do we have them? And if we do need boundaries so that we don't end up with consequences that are painful and destructive, how do we know what those boundaries are so that we don't end up chained to circumstances that are beyond our control? And I say this every Sunday. Like, it was daylight saving times, and I still woke up before my alarm. I was pumped to be here this morning because, listen, you and I are not the first people to ask this question, what are boundaries? You and I are not the first generation of people to wrestle with this. Matter of fact, every generation on every continent and in every area has had to deal with this. Matter of fact, God knew that this would be an issue. And matter of fact, this was so important that Jesus himself addresses this very issue for each and every one of us. Because Jesus doesn't want anyone to experience consequences that are destructive and painful. And it really doesn't matter what I think. It really matters what Jesus thinks because he's the only one that's conquered hell and death. And so we see what Jesus has to say about this. Matter of fact, we pick it up in the Gospel of Luke. Luke was kind of an historian who investigated Christ and was there in the first century. And here's what Luke says, Luke 6:46, 49. He says, why do you keep calling me Lord, Lord, when you don't do what I say? So Jesus is what I like about Jesus? When I read the Bible for the first time when I wasn't a follower of Jesus, I love that Jesus just told the truth. Jesus looked at people and says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and then don't do what I say? You see, you have to understand, when Jesus showed up, there were all kinds of kingdoms in the earth. And there was a different kind of kingdom that Jesus came to bring. And he says, listen, the religious people have the wrong picture of what God's like. God is a king, and he's come to set up his rule. And back in those days, your life was pretty much determined by who was in power. If you lived in a good kingdom with a good king and good and wise rules, you probably had a good and okay life that you could. And if you lived in a kingdom with a bad king or a bad kingdom and bad rules and bad things, your life was pretty miserable. And so Jesus showed up and said, listen, the kingdom of heaven has come. God is a ruler, and he has rules that allow you to live life. And then he looked at people and says, why do you call me or why do you call God Lord, but don't do the things that he asked you? Why do you do that? Why do you do that? And then he goes on to say, he says, I will show you what it is like when someone comes to me, listens to my teaching, and then follows it. It's like a person building a house who digs in a deep and lays the foundation on solid rock. It's work. It's not easy. It's something that requires something of them. When the floodwaters rise and break against the house, it stands firm because it is well built. And here's what he's saying. He says, listen, in the moment, anyone that listens to my word and actually goes and put it in practice, it may not always be fun. It may not always be easy in the moment, but you will have life. Things will work and you will be like, it isn't easy, but it's good. Then he goes on to say, but anyone who hears my word and doesn't obey them is like the person who builds a house on any old ground without a foundation. And when the floods sweep down against the house, it'll collapse into a heap of ruins. Jesus says, anyone that hears my words or hears the words of God, the rule of God, and says, oh, I heard them, but I'm going to ignore them. I'm not going to follow those boundaries. They end up in a heap of ruins. They were free and felt good in the moment, only to end up with consequences that were destructive and painful. Matter of fact, in the eyewitness account of the Gospel of John 12, 49 through 50, Jesus says, I don't speak in my own authority. My Father has sent me, has commanded me what to say, and I know his commands lead to eternal life. Jesus is saying, listen, God doesn't give I need everyone to look up here. Listen, here at SouthPoint, we love all kinds of people. We always kind of say a little phrase that goes something like this. We don't care why you're here. SouthPoint is a place for anyone, but you don't have to say that. We don't care where you've been because we believe God is more concerned about where you're going. We don't care what's been done by you, to you. We believe the greatest news is our life is defined by what Jesus already did on the cross, right? Like we have high grace here. But I need everyone to understand, Jesus doesn't give suggestions. God doesn't give like, hey, these are some good ideas. God gives commands. He gives boundaries because he knows they lead to life. Matter of fact, and I'm not going to read them to you, but if you go to the very beginning of Genesis, we see this in science. We see this in everyday life. When God created everything, you know what he did? He created, and he said, let there be light. And then there was light and there was darkness. And then it says he separated the light and the darkness. And he called one day and one night. It says God separated the waters and he created the upper heavens, the atmosphere. The only reason life can exist is because we have an atmosphere. All the other planets have an atmosphere that can't sustain life. That there's water and there's atmosphere that protects us. And then there's water on the earth and he separated. He says, man, that separation is good. And then he separated the land from the seas and we're alive and have a place to live and we're not in SeaWorld swimming around with gills because there's a separation between water and land. And it said he created the stars, and people get all worried about how God did it. I'm less concerned with how God did it. I'm more concerned at how it happened, God did it and he started it all. So we see in the very beginning that separation or boundaries creates or makes space for life. You see, Jesus teaches, and God's taught us from the very beginning. Matter of fact, if you're following along in your insert, this is a really important observation. Ready? Observation is boundaries make space for life and protect us from harm. The reason that God gives us boundaries, the reason that we should follow boundaries, the reason as parents or as adults who are engaged with kids should give boundaries is not because we want to be mean and harsh and be joy killers or be fun suckers. That's not our job. What we do is boundaries make space for life. Think about it. Why is a desert a desert? Because it has too much of something and not enough of something else. There's no separation. Could you imagine if there were no traffic signs? Could you imagine if there were no stop signs, if there were no lights, if there were no paintings on the road? You know how many accidents there would be if there were no speed limits? Boundaries make space for life and they protect us from harm. And so the truth is this morning, the boundaries don't always feel good in the moment, but they are good for us. Can everyone at least nod their head, okay? I get it. The boundaries don't always feel good in the moment, but they are good for us. They make space or create space for life, and they protect us from harm. And that's why God gives us commands. That's why we have boundaries. Now you might be asking, well, what are the boundaries? How do I know what my personal boundaries are? How do I help kids or other people have boundaries? What are kind of some important things about boundaries. How as we as parents, how do we as adults engage this concept of boundaries? And so I want to share a couple observations and principles that I think will help guide us as we try to set boundaries for ourselves, for our kids, and for those that we know around us. And here's kind of the first thing I would want to say, the first principle that can guide us, okay, is love. I mean, boundaries always are motivated by love. Boundaries are always motivated by love. And now I need to say something, and some of you, like, I know you look at me and think I'm not old enough to have done this, but I worked for an organization called Young Life. It's here in our local county. It's worldwide. It's an awesome organization. I worked with middle schooler and high schoolers for over a decade and built relationships, and I mean, I did that for a very long time. And so if you're here and you want to know what's important about boundaries or how to set them, here's the most important thing that I can tell you. I learned this when working with people for 2 decades, 12 plus years here at SouthPoint, and then a decade with Young Life. So if you're here and you're a parent or you know a kid or you think kids matter, here's the thing. Boundaries should be motivated by love, because here's what I discovered. If you want people to be successful, they need 2 things. They need love and they need limits. Let me say this again. I've seen this. I've been working with people for over 20 years, and I found it to be true regardless of gender, age, race, culture, ethnic, like whatever it is, whatever differences we have. These 2 things are necessary for people to succeed. They need love and they need limits. Now, we need to be really honest, though, because we're all different kinds of people, and most of us kind of broken into 2 groups of people. Some of us in this room, we love rules. Like, just tell me what the rules are, and I can follow the rules. Just tell me what they are. I know what they are. I can do that. Like, that just makes it simple. I don't have to think. I just follow. Like, I can do the rules. And then there are others that are just relational. It's like, let's just have fun. Why can't we just hang out? Why do rules really matter? Like, we should just all be happy, right? And the truth is, you need. Oh man, some of you guys are sharp. You need both. See, here's what I've discovered is we need to invest both in the relationship and in the rules. Now, I'm about to say something that may seem harsh, okay? So I want you to emotionally prepare you. It's a buck-up moment at SouthPoint True. I don't mean it harshly. I just mean it as a true statement. You see, love with no boundaries is just codependency. Okay? Can we be honest? Love without boundaries is codependency. What it means is you want to have a relationship with somebody, but you won't set boundaries to keep them in your life because you need them, but then you're not for them because you're unwilling to set limits. And that's called codependency, and that's unhealthy. Love without limits fails people. It isn't even genuine love if you're unwilling to set boundaries, because you're only willing to be in that relationship because if they like you. And parents, if you're here and you're a parent, or you're here and you're married, or you're here and you have a relationship with other people, at some point, parents, we have to be parents, not the best friend. Sometimes people may not like us because we have to set healthy, good boundaries. Now, the flip side is also true. And see, I kind of fall on the rule side, and my wife falls on the relationship side. But you need to invest both in the rules and the relationship. You can't just set boundaries and then have no relationship. Because here's what I've discovered. Rules without relationships is just oppression. The flip side of loving with no boundaries is codependency. Boundaries with no love is just oppression. All you're doing is you're being a bully and you're dictating and you're having that person do whatever it is you want to do, but you're not doing it for their benefit. So the flip side is equally true. So if you're here and you're a parent, or you're here and you work with kids, or you're here and you're married, or you're here and you want to get along in your relationships, and people need to know, hey, what are my boundaries? You need to invest in the rules and in the relationship. If you're here and you're going to be a parent, or you're going to know a kid, you can't just give rules. And if you're here and you're a parent or you know kids, you can't just give relationship. Because both are needed. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only begotten Son. God gave the humanity a whole planet. But he gave them rules. God loves us and he gives us limits. Love and limits. Now, I want to say something. This is really important, and this is one of the lessons I've learned the hard way, and I would say, listen, I told you as we started last week that I'm not a parenting expert, that most of what I'm sharing is from my failures, not my successes. But if you're here and you're a parent, I could make a whole sermon on this, but I don't have time in this series. But I want to give you one nugget when setting boundaries, when investing in relationship, when investing in rules, and here it is. Try not to answer the what question, try to answer the why question. See, when you answer the why question over the what question, you'll always get to the heart of the matter, because Jesus says it's not about behavior management on the outside. Jesus says evil doesn't start on the outside. Jesus says evil always starts on the inside. So when you talk about relationship, when you talk about rules, always address the why. And Jesus did this so awesomely. Jesus says, why should you do things? Because you love God. Why should you treat people a certain way? Because you're meant to love your neighbor as yourself. Always ask the why question. Don't always answer just, what is it that you want me to do, mom and dad? What is it that the kid or the friend or the spouse or whoever you're sitting with, what it is, talk about the why. Why? Because we're going to honor God who loves us and created us, and we're going to obey him because his rules lead to life. Well, why should we act this way? Because people matter deeply to the heart of God. And no matter how they act, they still are made in the image of God. And all human beings are worthy of dignity and respect. See, when you get to the heart of the issue, people always ask, well, what if I'm in this situation? When you answer the why, you answer every situation. See, that's what Jesus was so brilliant. Following Jesus is so simple, and yet it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. Jesus boils everything down. He goes, you want to know what the rules are for life? Here, let me just boil it down to 2. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then love your neighbor as yourself. He says all the laws hang on those 2 things. See, our boundaries should always be motivated by love. And so I just want to encourage us, are we investing not only in rules, are we investing in relationship? Now, principle number 2, okay? Children do what they see, not what they hear. Oh, y'all didn't like that, did you? I don't like it. Children don't do what you say, they do what they see. Listen, children do what is modeled, not what is mentioned with the mouth. Now, none of us like that. That's scary. True story. True as day, just sharing my failures. I have 2 teen daughters, and a while back, one of them didn't get something that they wanted, and they went, oh. And then the whole kind of the rest of the, if you ever, like, I don't know if you're here and you're a parent, you get the, like everything was, They opened the fridge, it was, They put something down, it was, You asked them to do something, it was, And I was just like, I just felt like, man, if you're just going to, every time you don't get you in life, like life is going to be miserable for you. And I was a little bit harsh, and I was a little bit of a jerk, and I had to go back and apologize to my kid. Just because I'm an adult and just because I'm older doesn't mean I'm always right. When you're wrong, you just need to say you're sorry, and it doesn't matter whether you're old or young. That was for free. You don't have to put anything extra in the offering for that. So my kid was doing that, and I was all bitter that they were, like, who raised this kid? I surely didn't. No lie. Like a day later, I was in the kitchen and I was doing something, and my wife turned to me, she goes, why are you huffing and puffing? And I go, what are you talking about? She goes, you're going, And it hit me. The reason that my kids huff and puff is because that's what I do. And I saw in them something that I do, and I hate it. And see, my kids don't do what I say. They do what I. So listen, I just want to be real honest. Parents, if you ask your kid to do something and then you do something different, don't be surprised that they don't do it. Like, I just want to ask an honest question. Whatever it is that we want of our kids, whatever it is that we want of our spouse, whatever it is we want of the people that we're in a relationship, when we say, what are my boundaries? See, this is what I love about Jesus. When Jesus showed up, Jesus modeled it. Matter of fact, when we go back to love, you know what Jesus, we see this in Ephesians. We're going to go back to the very first one. Sorry, I missed the scripture, but this is really important, so I feel like we're going to hit it real quick. Ephesians 6:4, it says this, and now a word to you parents, do not keep on scolding or nagging your children, making them angry or resentful. Oh man, that hurts right here. I'm a parent. Rather, bring them up with what? What's that word? Loving discipline. The Lord himself approves with suggestions and godly advice. Rules and relationship. And then Jesus says a little bit later in the eyewitness account of the Gospel of Matthew 12:33, he says this, a tree is identified by its fruit. A tree is good, its fruit will be good. If a tree is bad, its fruit will be bad. Listen, our kids see right through us. Kids do not do what we say, they do what we do. They identify. I'm telling you what, I worked with middle school and high school. They see through everything. You better just be you, because if you try to be a phony, they will see right through you. And so the reality is whatever it is that we value, whatever boundaries we want our kids to have, whatever boundaries we think kids should value, whatever boundaries we want our spouse, whatever boundaries we want with our friends, our coworkers, whatever we say, what are the boundaries? I want to ask a serious question. Are we doing those boundaries? Do you tell your kids to be nice and respectful, and then you treat the waiter or the server wherever you go like trash? Do you speak of dignity and tell your kids that they should love all people, and then you speak bad about different ethnicities? Do you tell kids they should control their anger, and then when you lose your anger, I've been, we're human, but the reality is whatever it is that we want from our kids, they're not going to do what we mention, they're going to do what we model. Jesus says a tree is recognized or identified by its fruit, like what it does. And so lastly, if we want to set what are the boundaries and we want to do that, be a consistent adult. Be a consistent adult. Listen, can we just be honest? Parenting, being married, working, sometimes relationships aren't always easy. Sometimes relationships require effort, they require work, right? And so I don't know about you, I only had one parenting thing in my belt that I knew how to use, and it was called anger. And I discovered early on that's a bad only tool to have. And so I call it, listen, we often try what I call the punishment and prize parenting skills, right? Oh, come on. Am I the only parent? You either yell at them and say, I'm going to punish you. I'm going to take that phone away. I'm going to take that thing away. I'm going to punish you. When we get in the car, when we get home, and we use punishment or we use prizes. Oh, come on. If you do this, I'll buy you something. If you just do this, Daddy will buy you an ice cream. Sometimes we boil parenting down to what I call punishing and prizes, and we kind of vacillate. We kind of try the prize thing. Come on, be good, and we'll give you this. And when they don't do it, we get angry and we give them the punishment thing. And I think those can be appropriate in the right settings. I'm not saying that to give a gift or to give a prize or to bribe them is necessarily wrong in all settings. And I would go, sometimes punishment is good and they should experience the consequences of their choices. But if I was honest, it was much easier just to use prizes and punishments than to be persistent in being the adult in the situation and have boundaries in which my children experience the consequences. It's just difficult being, and I realized my wife one time, and I think she said to me, hey, don't forget, you're the adult. I didn't feel like the adult in the situation, right? But we have to be the consistent adult. Matter of fact, I love what 1 Corinthians 13, 6 and 7 says. It says, love does not delight in evil, but it always rejoices in the truth. It always protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, and it always perseveres. See, the reality is parenting, marriage, and relationships are usually a long-term issue. But often when it comes to parenting and relationships and when we set boundaries, we often want the short-term easy thing. And it is easy in the moment to give out a prize. It is easy in the moment to over-punish. It's easy in the moment to give them a pass. But it requires effort, discipline, and sometimes some pain to be a parent who perseveres, who goes, no, that was the boundary, you crossed it, sorry, you now have to experience the consequences, even if it means the rest of the family is disrupted, or it doesn't feel good for me as the parent to do that, or it creates dislike, or it creates, whatever it is, we have to be the adults. So listen, it really isn't rocket scientists. The reasons that we need boundaries, even as adults and as kids, is that boundaries make space for life. A lack of boundaries may feel good, it may seem freeing, but it changes to consequences that none of us would ever want. Boundaries protect us, they make space for life. And when we try to engage with boundaries with people that we love and care about, boundaries should always be motivated by love. You have to invest both in the rules and in the relationships. Right? And when it comes to boundaries, you can't just talk a good game. You actually have to live a good game. You have to do what it is. You know, you want respect from your spouse, you want respect from your kids. Do you give respect? Do you want honor from your kids or from your spouse or do you give honor? And lastly, we just have to be the consistent adult. It's not easy. Discipline does, and boundaries require effort. It does require discipline. And no's aren't fun. But sometimes no's are yeses for things that are better later. And sometimes as adults, we have to remember that we have to say no for a better yes, because parenting, marriage, and relationships are a long-term deal. True story, I'll close with this about boundaries. This is a little scary. It was a couple Saturdays ago, and I don't know if you do. I got 2 teen daughters, and so it was Saturday morning, and I get up early. I'm just used to getting up early, and so I got up for what is early for a teen on a Saturday morning, and I get it. You know, teens should be able to sleep in. I don't want to be a jerk. Like, I let them sleep in, and but man, after 8 a.m., I'm joking, right? I get it, 10, 11, even noon. I'm even willing, I get it, man. You're a teen. Sleep to noon. Enjoy it. You get to be a teen once, right? I get it. I'm cool. It's good. But then I start to freak out when, chores don't get done. And I remember I came home from something on a Saturday and the chores weren't done. And I just had one of those dad freak out moments where I'm like, give me the phones. Give me the computers. No one's doing anything. We're going to clean this house from top to bottom. And I stopped and I started chuckling. And I remembered I've become my dad. I've become my adopted dad. I mean, I really used to think my adopted dad didn't like me because he would take me out to work with him, and he'd always make statements that just seemed weird, and he'd be like, son, right is always right, and wrong is always wrong. And I was like, what? Who cares? I'm a teen, right? It's we got to work, and we're going to help people, and we're going to do a good job, and no, you can't do that, and your word is your bond, and if you say you're going to do something, you do it. And he would do all these things, and I can remember growing up, I was like, my dad, man, he was, I just remember not liking him. I did not like him. Now, I loved him and knew that he loved me. I mean, he took me in when I was homeless. He put a roof over my head. He put food in my mouth. And so I loved him, but I did not like him because he was always on me. And you know what's amazing? Is in that moment, I didn't like him. But my dad, my adopted dad, is now my best friend. I'm the man I am today outside of Jesus. I mean, Jesus and the Holy Spirit. And those lessons that my dad taught me when I didn't like them are the things that helped me become the man who I am and allowed me to be married for almost 23 years, allowed me to be the parent of my kids, allowed me to stay in ministry for 20 plus years. All the things I didn't like as I grew up, I began to realize he wasn't being a jerk. He was helping me succeed in life. My dad loved me enough to say, listen, I know it feels good and it feels freeing, but it will chain you to things that will destroy your life. Don't do it. And I love you enough to say so. And so if you're here today and you're one of those adults and you never learned what your boundaries were, and you have a relationship with God, and sometimes you ask, why does God say certain things to not do these things? It's not because he's a fun sucker. It's because God created life. And he gives you commands and boundaries so that your life will be good and it won't end up in ruin. And if you're here and you're a parent, or you're going to invest in the life of a kid, you have to invest in relationship and you have to set boundaries. Because without someone setting boundaries for them, they won't be able to know what boundaries they should have, and they will experience consequences and pain that no one should experience. I'm grateful for a God who both loves us and gives us limits so that we can experience life. Let me pray. Hey, God, it's amazing that you love us, that you call us sons and daughters. Even those of us who've walked away, even those of us who have done things that are wrong, even those of us who said, God, I don't want anything to do with you. You're always calling us home, God. There's no sin that can't be forgiven. God, but you do love us enough to tell us the truth. God, you do love us enough to set boundaries that make space for life and protect us from harm. God, you know that what feels good in the moment and feels freeing will carry consequences later. And you love us enough and you give us dignity to choose whether we're going to love you. God, help us. Help us as parents. Help us as spouses. Help us as friends and coworkers and bosses and people that know kids to invest in both relationship and rules. God, help us to not just talk a good game, but to live it out. God, help us to be consistent, to not take shortcuts in our parenting and in our relationships with boundaries, but to persevere and to be consistent. We love you and thank you for the wisdom that you give us so that we can experience life and life to the full. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.